Hi, Aoife. Welcome to the pod. It's great to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first podcast, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Pleasure. I'm sure it'll be great for all the listeners to hear about you. So let's kick it off. Why don't you tell me a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Aoife. I'm Irish Belgian. I am the founder of Aeva Health, which is an all-encompassing women's health platform that marries AI with human expertise. It sounds a bit strange to say human expertise, but just so you guys know the difference. And my background is in commercial growth and strategy, ex-management consultant. That's where we met. And prior to that, worked in a couple other businesses. I probably would have described it before as a startup, but I realized it was more of a scale up at made.com and worked in luxury before then.
Brilliant. So tell me about Aeva Health. What does the business do?
Aeva Health is really on a mission to make holistic health more accessible and affordable for women. So, holistic health is really looking at the woman as a whole, encompassing her emotional, mental, and physical well being. And so the platform is really having a centralized place where we can remove the burden of women feeling confused and overwhelmed and not fully knowing what to do and helping them get health plans, getting matched to expert practitioners across those different areas. So therapists, we have nutritionists, we've got cycle syncing experts, we've got hormone experts, we've got fertility, we've got Reiki, we've got meditation, we've got the whole thing. And you've also got your AI. So it's like having a personal health team in your pocket 24/7. And the combination of the two are both separate offerings, but they're also complementary and they work really well together. And I really wanted to create something that was personalized, that was scientifically backed, that was evidence backed, and that could really act as a health partner to women that are either of a younger generation or demographic that are getting their information on social media, or those that are just thinking, I don't know what to do, and therefore I'm going to do nothing. And whether you're trying to optimize your health, so if you're feeling, waking up feeling bloated or tired, there's something that you could do, you just don't quite know what, we'll help you with that. If you've been diagnosed with something and you're still managing your condition, we'll also help you with that. Those offerings will look a little bit different. But we are really there to help any woman on their health journey.
Amazing. And where did the idea for the business come from?
It's a very personal one. So really, Aeva Health is a business that I wish I had 8.5 years ago when I was diagnosed with a really severe and very debilitating autoimmune thyroid condition. So it's called Hashimoto. And basically, yeah, it took me a couple months to get diagnosed. I really couldn't function. I couldn't work. I couldn't really get out of bed. Now, normally it takes, on average, 6 to 7 years to get diagnosed for autoimmune. So a couple months, although it felt like a long time, because mentally and physically you're thinking, well, why am I not able to function? And then people saying, like, just get out of bed. Like, why can't you get out of bed? And then so you're having this like constant mind-body sort of friction that develops. And that's really important as part of what Aeva Health is and the fact that we're integrating both as well as the emotional state. And so couldn't get out of bed, couldn't really function. It's important to note I wasn't bedridden, right? But I really couldn't function. I really couldn't just spring out of bed. It was just really, really debilitating. Had got diagnosed, was told it was the worst they'd seen, and they could count on one hand how many people they'd got diagnosed with this condition that was so severe. I was 24 at the time, so it was quite young to have that. Went to see a lot of different doctors. When I said, what can I do with my health? Can I eat differently? Can I work out differently? What can I do? I was reading all of these medical research reports saying like gluten's really bad, this, that, and the other. So anyway, long story short, was really dependent on them to tell me how I was feeling. And so I remember coming out of those meetings, they're saying, you need to up your medicine, you're having a flare up. And then I'd walk away feeling like, oh yeah, I'm not feeling great. And on the flip side, if they said, oh, you're doing great, the bloods are coming back, I then thought, oh, great, I'm feeling great. So I was really dependent on them to tell me how I was feeling. And about 3 years ago, or a little less than that, I unknowingly got into holistic health. My mission there was just to reduce my symptoms and to take a bit more control of my own health. And so what I did is I got really curious about my gut health. I got into like intuitive eating. So I got really curious as to why I was craving different things. I got into nervous system regulation. So I did a course on that, which was really, really interesting. So yeah, I then started reducing my symptoms. And today I'm really proud to say that I'm in full remission. And so that was something that was really really positive surprise, but
Absolutely.
not what I was expecting. And so Aeva Health, that's where Aeva Health was born. I thought, I want to have one place where I can really remove the burden of women that are trying to navigate optimizing your health biohacking. But there's so much information out there. And because women are deemed quite complex beings, that I would flip that and say, we're to celebrate that we ebb and flow through how we're made, and that's how our hormones are set up. And I think for too long, people have labeled that as too complex, and that's what's happened in the medical space, and the clinical research has mirrored that today, and we can get into that in a little bit as well. So really what Aeva Health is to remove the burden for women so that they can come onto a platform that they trust. Trust is a really foundational element to health, but also to what we're building, what Aeva Health stands for, and help them with one thing that day. So you don't have to be on or off your health journey, because we all have more capacity to do different things at different weeks and different months. And that's just how we operate, whether it's seasonal or according to our cycles. And so I think it's really important to understand that and then leverage that to our full potential.
Amazing. And I think holistic health is something that's becoming much more topical at the moment. People are starting to realize you don't have to rely on this, typical medicine to solve all your problems. And how would you define holistic health? I think you've alluded to it there in some of the topics you mentioned, but what is it for those out there listening?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important question. So before I answer that, I'll share a little story. So a couple weeks ago, I think months ago at this stage, I just losing track of time. But we went to the streets and asked women as part of our social media campaign that will be launching in Jan, what does health mean to you? What does holistic health mean to you? 50% of them said it's the mental and emotional and physical, and it's that real connection between the mind and body that for a lot of the time we disconnect, and we either focus on the mind or we either focus on the body. And I think that combination is often missed. And that's really what holistic health is. It's really looking at everybody. In Aeva Health's instance, is at the woman as a overarching, as a whole person. And that's really important because for me, and Aeva Health is really based on my own health story. And what it means is, for me, I was looking at because my health condition was manifesting in my thyroid, and it was a physical manifestation. So everything was focused on my physical body, and we were missing the emotional and mental side of things. And so I think when you can piece those different parts of your puzzle together, you have a whole picture. And you can also start understanding the interconnectedness between the different areas. And I think there's a lot of companies out there that are doing great things in each of those spaces. Very few are doing it in one and integrating all of those. And I think as a result, what's happening is there's quite a fragmented user experience in the health space. And so that's really where, I see the opportunity and where Aeva Health comes in. And I think a lot of people ask me, why is it just for women? Like, why are you only starting this for women? And I'm not going to bore you with too many stats, but I will give you one big one. And roughly 96% of the data that exists in our world today is based on the male body. And so that stems from a couple different things, but primarily it stems from the fact that women have always been deemed quite complex beings. And if you're trying to do a clinical trial and you don't have to include women, then let's just stick to the more simple male body, because there's less ebbs and flows. It's less complex. Let's just stick to, we can do tests throughout, just testing one, like medicine. Do you want a little bit of history on it?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So in the late 1960s was a drug that came out that basically was for women who were pregnant, and it was to help them with their morning sickness. And in Australia and Europe, that was approved. Now, what happened is that the babies started having defects. And because that had happened, what the FDA in the US, and then that kind of trickled across the world, had just decided any woman of childbearing age to just get cut from all clinical trials. I would argue that we as women are still, to a certain degree, guinea pigs, because we still don't know how certain, what different medication can really have, at least like long-term on the body.
Absolutely. And it's so eye-opening for someone like me, because I was never aware of this completely, just this unserved need, which is women's health, and how little attention it's really had over the years. So I think it's brilliant what you're doing with Aeva Health, and I'm sure it will be hugely successful and help a lot of people. So how's it been You've been running the business now for, I think, around 6 months. What's that journey been like?
So it's been great. I have to say, like, I've really, really, really enjoyed it. Where to start? So I think there's a couple things. I think my biggest learning was pretty early on when I realized, I think, in any job we are faced with ourselves, but I think we can kind of hide behind our team or hide behind our colleagues. I think when you're, a solo first-time founder, you have to just look at yourself, and there's a mirror that's held up to yourself. And all the little tendencies that one has, you have to kind of face them, right? And I really didn't realize how much of a personal growth starting a business was. And so I think that was like one of the big eye openers. And I think when you start bringing a team into that, you become the culture. And I think you have to be, really mindful, especially when you're trying to deliver things and when you're trying to, launch, which is where I'm at right now. And you need to make sure that, that for me, team is so important. And the people that you have around you, whether it's your advisors, whether it's people in your network, whether it's your friends, or, I found our friends like giving me advice and helping me out. So I really enjoyed it. I think I've put a little bit of pressure, too much pressure on myself. And I think that's coming directly from consulting, where, we'd have 3 weeks to like 6 weeks to deliver a whole strategy. Part of being consulting, and I know that we've spoken about this before in terms of timelines and urgency and like moving forward. I think that's been, you realize that things take so much longer when you're starting something up, because there's you to factor time for learning, for like errors, for actually just working with different people. And they might have, was your brief really clear? If you haven't worked in product before or tech and you're putting the brief together, you just need to make sure that you've thought it through and make sure that when you hand it over, it's definitely everything that you've understood. And I think because Aeva Health is so ingrained in my own personal story, a couple of things on that point. I spoke to one of my advisors at the beginning, and he said to me, that story is incredible. It took me a while to tell it to him, because I think for a long time, my career and my personal life were so separate.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's like, I don't know if you'd agree with this, George, but like, I think in corporates, there's not that much vulnerability. Like, people definitely have, there's chit chat and everything, but nobody really tells you how they feel. I mean, you'd be surprised if someone said, how are you? Oh gosh, I'm really terrible.
Yes.
Let me tell you why. It's sort of surface level, right? I think it's super
Oh,
normal.
absolutely. They say bring your whole self to work, but you definitely don't. There's some fraction of you that they really see in the workplace.
And and that's, I have so many comments on that. I think sometimes when people do, and then you think, oh my goodness, I'm not sure if I can work with them again.
Yes.
So I think for me, that was like also a big eye-opening moment where I thought, people really care about my story. That really took me back. And so what was interesting is then the two parts, like the professional and the personal life, became intertwined, and that was new for me. And it was new for me that people were interested in my health story, and as much, the more I shared, the more they were interested. I think because Aeva Health is the story behind that is very much related to my own health journey. I think it's about really separating yourself from what you're building. And so as much as it's on one hand very related to myself and my personal journey, you have to disconnect yourself from it and make sure that you're serving your clients, your customers, and that you're building something to make a difference for women. And if they don't think a feature is good, if they don't like these colors, they don't like that and the other, as much as you love it, you have to park it. And obviously, I think you have to have enough people to say that, right? You can't just take one person, because otherwise you'd be changing it too much, and you could really, be totally off kilter and lose your kind of essence as a brand. But I think it's really important, especially in the early days, to pivot and to make sure that you're constantly checking in. So something that we didn't talk about was how originally I always knew I wanted to build a women's health business, but originally it was going to be quite tied to my story. So I wanted to build something that was in the autoimmune space. And as a good ex-consultant, I quickly realized that the average woman that likes anything in the holistic space is roughly late 20s, early 30s.
Yep.
And the average woman that has autoimmune conditions is roughly around 50. So there's a big disconnect there. And I think no matter, even if I wanted to stay in the health and wellness space, the customers would be comparing me to to other medical offerings. And so because of my background, I just didn't really feel very comfortable with that. And so I think that would also be a tip for other people is get the feedback in quickly, and also do your due diligence as quickly as possible so that, you can pivot. And pivoting isn't a bad thing. I think a lot of people get uncomfortable pivoting. And I think they can sometimes feel, and I'm guilty of this as well, you kind of sometimes feel like, God, if I pivot, that means that I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think that the opposite. I think people that pivot and that really have their ear to the ground says a lot about them. I think it's a really positive thing.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot to unpack there, but one of the things you mentioned was your story. And I think that's so key to the business. I've read that purpose-built or purpose-led businesses grow 4 times as fast as those that just set up for just, to make money, essentially. So I think that story is really key to what you're doing at Aeva Health. And I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people out there. And one of the things you mentioned to me earlier was that you're a recovering perfectionist, which I loved. I think that was amazing. And I just wondered, what's that journey been like for you, going from consulting where everything has to be perfect, and you've got these sprints, you've got a lot of, it's full on. What's that been like to suddenly just being you, navigating the world of starting your business?
You're dead right, because when I think about the transition from consulting, what you're delivering in what category, everything's like very structured, everything is, and they say, which I think when you start a business, you kind of, I used to laugh at it in my head. I was thinking, they said that consulting was, you had to be like really agile, and it was very ambiguous and fast paced. And those things are all true. Definitely the fast paced is very true. But I think that in the world of entrepreneurship, it's a lot more ambiguous. Not necessarily fast paced. I think it depends on what pace you want to move, which I think has its pros and cons. But coming back to your question about perfectionism, that was something, and I think that comes back to my previous point about you're kind of faced with yourself. And I think I think perfectionism gets a little too much hate sometimes, and I think it definitely, serves a purpose. I think you can have really high expectations of yourself, of your team, and I think that can really drive people forward. And I think you can, send something out that feels maybe 70, 80% there. You share it with something still feels on brand, but serves the purpose of maybe testing something really quickly.
Yep.
So I think there's a benefit there. I think where perfectionism is definitely something, George, I've had to address. I'm still addressing. Let's be honest. I think it's just finding the right balance, right? And I think it's like anything. It's what are the things that are your no-nos? What are the things that you absolutely will kind of fight for and make sure that they're like, really high-end quality? And what are the things that you're like, you know what? I can probably change for 6 months' time, or like it's not really going to necessarily like, throw people off or going to make them look at the brand. I think that does not make me think of, what we've seen so far from Aeva Health. And so I think, funnily enough, now that my to-do list is, constantly evolving and growing, prioritization is, I can't overstress that. You have to be like ruthless with the priorities, and you just have to, I think you just have to be really ruthless with that and just think, what can you, delegate? What do you absolutely need to do yourself? And what are the things that maybe you need to do yourself first? And then you can kind of have that example, then delegate. I think the other thing with the list that grows, I'd had to just be like, that's good enough, that's good enough, that's good enough. But I think I'm the type of founder that, because Aeva Health has an AI component to it, and because it's all virtual and online, it's really important for me that I'm setting the bar high in terms of, confidentiality, in terms of like data, in terms of making sure I'm really clear where all the data is being held and getting that reviewed and making sure that everything is airtight, because it's sensitive, health information. If people are having like a difficult time, be it mentally, physically, emotionally, I want them to feel, safe. And that comes back to our point that we discussed just before about like trust being such a foundational element to what I'm building, and just making sure that I, don't take our customers' trust for granted. And so I spend a lot of time educating myself on AI and asking a lot of questions on doing a lot of maps, understanding where the data is, where that's being saved, like how do we make sure everything's really, really safe, but really effective.
Absolutely. And as you said, we mentioned trust, and that's been fundamental to the way you've built the business. It's completely shaped how it operates. And you mentioned the infrastructure of Aeva Health there. Perhaps you could provide an overview of what that's like. I mean, I know you've got developers scattered across the world and a team working all over the place. Could you describe your team for me, how you've gone about building it and what role they play?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm bootstrapping,
Yes.
which I think we might talk about after in terms of fundraising, because I think that's really important to understand. And I think before I answer that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story. This is a little bit of a trend here at this podcast. Is when I started, so left consulting at the end of last year, took a bit of time off and just got really curious as to how does one start a business?
Mm.
And I metaphorically had my notepad out and I was like, okay, I'm ready. Tell me, how do you start a business?
Yeah.
And so I quickly realized that there was, in my opinion, at that time, very naive of myself, that I thought you had to go to an accelerator. You then went to VC, you had a pitch deck, you got funding. And for a couple of different reasons, like that doesn't often happen, especially in today's economic climate where like VCs don't necessarily just for a great pitch deck, especially if you're first time solo founder, will just invest in you. And so basically, I got really, really curious as to how does one start a business. Asked around, I thought that was what, I can say it. It was silly of me to think there was one way. And I think that mirroring and echoing coming from consulting where everything was structured, there was one way of doing things. And I think that I really, really wanted to recreate that structure and that sort of path into entrepreneurship. And I quickly realized that's not possible, that there's so many different ways to get there. And I think not everyone wants to become a unicorn and not everyone can become a unicorn. I think because the problem that I'm solving is a fragmented, disjointed and also, I guess, a little bit untrusting experience and ecosystem that women are experiencing in their health journeys today, the solution is therefore centralization. And that's quite difficult when you start talking about MVPs, which is a minimal viable product. And the concept behind that is how can you build in the shortest time, in the least amount of costs, and get something that's somewhat related to what you want to build to test as quickly as possible, get that feedback, iterate, and just keep doing that until you've got something or got enough, feedback and traction to indicate that. So I was doing part-time. It was nearly 4 days a week of consulting for another business in the space and then building a business on the side. And that was I think that was a really, really good decision for me because I wasn't then accountable and I don't think accountable is the right word. I didn't have to answer to anyone that was asking me like, why are you doing this? How come you're not doing that? And it was a really nice space for me to discover and to get really curious and to just spend some time and do a lot of customer development, doing surveys and a lot of interviews and getting really, really, really clear as to, not only what I wanted to build, because I am also my target audience, which has its pros and cons. Because you don't want to just build something for yourself, you want to build something for your audience. And I think that you want to make sure that you're aligning your financial setup, whatever that might be, to what you're trying to achieve. And for me, that was just a really nice sort of safe space to nail the foundation. And now, the platform's in build and we're in a really good space and we could talk a bit about what my next steps are. So come back to your question about the team. Because I'm bootstrapping, obviously every cent, every pound counts, which is why the team is a little bit spread out. So the current setup is 2 team members part-time, and I have a couple contractors who just seem to be international at this stage, across the globe, to leverage expertise, but also at a rate that, I can afford given that I'm bootstrapping. And then I have some amazing advisors as well. And I'm actually looking to build that out further, especially in the medical side of things, to bring that like robustness and credibility, even though I'm not sitting in the medical space. I'm in the health and wellness quite intentionally. But I think it's really important when you're dealing with someone's health to bring that medical robustness and credibility to the table as well.
100%. And you're approaching quite an exciting stage of the business, to be mentioned. The next iteration's coming out just next week, I think, and you're going for funding sometime soon. What's that process been? Why did you choose to bootstrap it? And how are you approaching going for funding? Why is now the right time?
Yeah, great question. I think so. Bootstrapping was a decision I made because I think I underestimated, and I think this comes back to to starting a business for the first time. I think one can underestimate the time it takes to navigate the different complexities of what you're building. And I think with the AI component in health, I think there's a little bit of nervousness around that. And I think it's important to get that balance right between overthinking, over engineering it, and not getting that MVP sort of agile testing phase in place. But I think you can also go too soon into the testing, getting something out there that maybe wasn't fully kind of tested and thought through. And I think especially, and I think this is definitely going to differ in different industries. And so I think, tech, pure tech, fintech, I think those industries definitely, I mean, it depends what you're doing in fintech, but I think on average, like those industries, you can get something that's really quick and easy and start testing it out there. I think in the health space, you have to be really careful. And that comes back to our point on trust. That's a reoccurring theme throughout this podcast. But it's really important. So the bootstrapping for me enabled me to find a really nice in between where I wasn't necessarily, I was educating myself because at first I fell into I don't know if it's quite a trap, but I fell into this notion, of having to have co-founders and, I needed an accelerator program and they were going to invest if I didn't have a CTO, and I needed like a CEO, which was, would have been myself and a CTO and, maybe like a medical, like a CMO, right? And so when I discovered, I was like, okay, that's what I need to do. I need to go find these people. And I quickly realized that, at least for now, that's not the right path for me, just because Aeva Health is so closely aligned to my story that I had a long chat with myself and I realized that in my head, I'd be setting them up for failure because I don't think they would, because it's not their story, because maybe they might not be as passionate as I am or as dedicated. As an entrepreneur, you do work 24/7. Let's be honest. That was a really important realization for me. So decided to bootstrap, and that enabled me to have a really nice safe space and time to learn. And I discovered this business that was called If We Raise with Hattie and Tim. Shout out to them. They're honestly incredible. And they, run through the different funding strategies that you can have. And one of them is bootstrapping. One of them is angels. And there's one of them is friends and family. And that's often what kind of happens in your tradition. Like, I guess like a traditional way of doing that would be maybe raising friends and families, extending to angels, getting, a little bit of cash, applying for SCIS, EIS, definitely for any of your listeners that are thinking of doing this, definitely apply to that.
And what are those quickly, for those that don't know what they are?
SCIS is a seed enterprise investment scheme, and then EIS is enterprise investment scheme. And basically it's a tax, it's a capital gains like tax. You can take a certain percentage, depending on which one you go for, between 50 to 30% at the end of the year. So that means early stage startups are risky, especially if you haven't necessarily got a MVP or proved the traction out to a certain degree. And so the UK government, have, which is great, they tried to de-risk that and make it a little bit more interesting for UK residents that are taxpayers. And so that helps to a certain degree. So that's something I definitely would recommend people to look at if they're trying to fundraise. I think what's really important with funding is just understanding your responsibilities and what you're looking for. So some investors, which I think are probably few and far between, will give you the money and they won't give you any advisory capacity. And I think if that's what you're looking for, fair enough. VCs are probably aligned closer to that. But there'll be a lot of pressure in terms of profitability, in terms of revenue generation, in terms of, customers that you're acquiring, that you're getting, and that, they want to have high growth. I think if you're looking, on the other hand, for like an advisory capacity as well as investment, and then I think, it's really good to be quite clear on what your expectations are. And I think sometimes if you bring advisors in too soon, if you give equity away too soon, although that problem might be fixed, 3 to 6 months down the line, you might have another problem that arises. And so it's just about, having that kind of foresight. And then that I think having mentors is really important. Those that are, maybe 10 years ahead of you that have exited or that have their own business and can help you with those different milestones where just to put that on your horizon so you can start planning for those as well. It's so easy to get tunnel vision. So I think my overarching tip would be make sure that you're really clear on your expectations, on where you're at, what you're trying to raise. So if you're trying to raise quite a lot and you want high growth, it's better to go to a VC, but then just know, what the expectations on the flip side will be. If you go with angels, it will take, I don't know, but I've heard from speaking to a couple of them that it takes somewhere in between 6 to 12 months for them to follow you, to get to know you, to see how, either you're pivoting or how you're making choices in the business, for them to feel confident in your abilities. Obviously, if you're a second, third time founder, that will de-risk it a little bit for them. So yeah, I think it's just being really clear about that and just knowing who you're getting into business with and what the expectations on the flip side will be, because I think a lot of people get focused on the VC, and I think that has a lot of merit, but it's not the only way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important to have a clear goal when you go for funding. You need to know what you really want to achieve. And the point you mentioned there about unicorns, I thought was really interesting, because I was reading with an article from Harry Stebbings earlier this week, who's the founder of 20 VC, which started off as a podcast as well, funnily enough. And he now recently...
No expectation for you.
I know. But yeah, he raised recently a £300 million fund. Huge, done amazingly. But I think he invested in 300 different companies and only 9 reached that unicorn status. And I think that's even incredibly high, twice the ratio of what you'd see out there. So it's definitely not possible for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And as you say, not many want to as well. So one of the interesting things you mentioned there as well was the role of AI in your platform, and Aeva Health.
Yeah.
What role do you think AI has to play in health more generally and in Aeva?
So because my mission is to make holistic health more accessible and affordable for women, I truthfully at the beginning was a little bit unsure of AI, because I thought, for me, my experience, I really wanted to give something of quality and that was quite human. And I think if you're doing something with mental health and emotional health, I'll hold my hands up and say, for me, I was guilty of associating AI with this robotic, not human side of things. And I had to really look into that and get comfortable myself with that, because I didn't want to deliver something that wasn't valuable to our audience. That was really important to me, and that really hit the nail on the head. So in order for it to be accessible and to help as many women as possible, and to basically democratize, but also personalize the information that, we're putting out there, so many women are so confused about what to do with their health because there's so many different bits of information. Women from, let's say, 16 to 25 today, for the Gen Z, they will get their information on social media for their health. Now, not all these people are equipped to give this information. I think a lot of them share their stories, which I think is really powerful. But everyone's genes are different, and everyone has different absorption rates of different, minerals and vitamins. And so if you're over-indexing on magnesium, your body might not be able to absorb it, right? And so I think what AI helps do is personalize, democratize, and really disseminate, depending on the source, but in our case, really evidence and science-backed information. I think that's the movement that we're seeing in healthcare. And I think that's really important to counteract, especially the younger generation that's, getting a lot of their health insights on platforms from people that maybe aren't necessarily equipped to give it. And I think that's quite dangerous.
Definitely. And it's my best friend at the moment as well. It's where I turn to for all of my needs. So I can see why it would play a central role in Aeva.
So what's your favorite one?
Oh, ChatGPT is where I always turn to.
Okay. Yeah. Have you made your own, or?
No, it fires all my questions at it. I use that instead of Google these days.
Yeah.
But it's brilliant.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now we're on the topic of health. What is one thing both men and women could do to improve their health? Holistically.
So I think, I know that we're getting a lot of, the gut health is getting a lot of attention. I think there's a good reason. Gut health is the second brain, and there's a lot of studies coming out that, ADHD is linked to gut health. And I think there's a lot of really interesting research coming out there. So the thing I say is just be conscious of what first thing you're putting into your body once you wake up. So you want to have a nice big glass of water, probably not tap water, especially if you live in London.
Yes.
Try and get really good filter. And I'd say probiotic, but then probiotics, it's really difficult to have this generalization, but just be really mindful of what you put in. So if you can have like lemon water, if you want to juice, something that's like going to replenish your body, that's really helpful. It's difficult to give really generic advice because everyone's going to be different. But something that's really helped me is having Celtic sea salt in the morning, and just having that in either hot or cold water, depending on what temperature is outside, with a bit of lemon is really helpful. From the physical side, I think the mental side is just being really conscious of your internal dialogue. I really can't emphasize that enough. When I did my nervous system reset course, at the beginning, I was like, here we are talking about like how I'm speaking to myself and how this. I was like, that's not really going to help me with my health. And I really think we underplay that massively. The way that we choose is a choice to react to different things has huge impacts on our whole health. And so I think it's just about being a bit kinder to ourselves and setting ourselves up for success. So that internal critic, try and reframe that and just be conscious of like the internal dialogue that will help, regulate your nervous system. And I think meditation is amazing. Mindfulness is amazing. Visualization is amazing. Getting daily sunlight in the morning before you open your phone.
Key.
Yeah. And then try and not open your phone for an hour when you wake and a half an hour before you go to bed. And then try and get into the sunlight as quickly as possible. And then your gut health, and just be conscious of your thoughts. Those would be the baseline to start with.
Absolutely. And I'm terrible on my phone. It's the first thing I look at as soon as I wake up. But I think what you mentioned about the gut there is fascinating. And it's something that I've been reading a lot about recently. And I've got some statistics here that those with a diverse biome have 35% lower depression and 30% lower anxiety. And that's where 90% of serotonin is produced. So it's absolutely key to your mental well-being and physical well-being. With all that in mind, if you could look ahead and speak to Aoife a year in advance, where would you like to be and what would you like to accomplish?
So I think I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first part is what would I like to say to myself? I think it's just what we touched on this a little bit is enjoy the ride, because I think it's so easy to get fixated on the next milestone. And then if I could look back, I honestly, truly, I would love to see a community of women that are, where Aeva Health is really making a difference, and that they're leaning on what we're building and really feeling part of the journey and feeling listened to, and that we're really building something to help women. That really truly is why I started this. So I think it's so easy when you start a business to get caught up with the next milestone and, getting advisors and investment. I'm so guilty of that. Trust me, I am. But I think it's just really important to come back to your why. And I think sometimes if your why is not strong enough or, personal enough, I think that is often where challenges can arise. And I think it's just important to come back to why you built this. So I think that's something that I'm trying to enjoy and wanting to be, wanting Aeva Health to be part of my life for a long time.
Absolutely. And it's such a personal business. It's tied completely to your story. So it's important that it's rooted in that why and central to what you do. So if you could recommend one book for those listening out there about health and what we spoke about, how they can improve their holistic health, how they can best themselves, and one about entrepreneurship, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So let's start with entrepreneurship. So there's a book out there called The Mom Test. The premise of it is that if you ask your mom, do you think this is a good idea? Yes, honey, I think it's great. You're doing great, my love. Like, keep going. And the whole idea is that even if you asked your mom, the way that you're setting the test up is that your mom would have to be really honest with you, because the types of questions that you're asking are not very simple, yes or no. But it really helps you to test your idea out and get really honest feedback. And I think that comes back to a couple of points that I made throughout, is just how important it is to test and stay close to your customers and really understand what you're building and making sure that that really aligns to them, and just getting really crystal clear on that, so that you don't find yourself, building something 6 months down the line, you realize that, no one's really enjoying or necessarily using it in the way that you want. And that can be quite frustrating. So I think the Mom Test is really great for those that are starting to think of doing businesses, and it's a great approach. On the health, I mean, there's so many, but there is one that I think is really relevant to holistic health. It's for men and women, and it's called You Can Heal Your Life. And what's the message there, I think, is really important, is reinforcing that power that we all have, and just being really conscious of how we speak to each other, how we speak to ourselves, and the different sort of reactions that we have. And I think it's a really powerful book.
Absolutely. No, thank you for those. I'll add them both to the show notes so anyone listening can find them, and I'll certainly pick them up myself. So it's been brilliant talking to you today. We're nearing the end of our conversation. Do you have any final words of wisdom for the listeners? Any final messages you'd like to leave?
Yeah, I think my message would be, if there's that idea that you have, if there's something that's niggling you that you're really interested in, if you're in a job that you're feeling not super enthused by, and you're doing something that's like bringing you joy and happiness, and it's just giving you that extra, spring in your step. We're all guilty, like so guilty, of not pursuing that. And I think it can be seen as really, really scary. And I think in some ways, I think there's like being naive to start a business is actually quite powerful, because some people say if you knew just how many obstacles you were going to be faced with, and if that was listed in front of you, almost imagine like a contract. If I was to hand that to you and say, right, sign on the dotted line for entrepreneurship, most people would be like, no, like with all of these, it's just going to eat into my personal life. It's going to do this, that, and the other. And I think I can understand why that's really scary. But I think if you're passionate about something and the joy it can bring and the freedom that it could bring, I think is really, really powerful. But I also think life's too short. So go out and start that business, or start that side hustle, or start that thing that you are a little bit, that you've been thinking about, but you're not too sure how to start. And I think, reach out to me, reach out to people in your network, and start building that network. So you can do it in a really safe and nice way that you don't necessarily have that pressure where you have to perform and you have to deliver, because I think that exploratory phase is really important. It's really important to have it in a non-pressurized environment. And so my advice would be go for it.
I think that really resonates. You've just got to take that jump, park your fears behind you and go for it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Aoife. It's been brilliant to talk to you today. How can listeners get in touch and find out more about Aeva Health?
First of all, thank you so much, George. It's been lovely to actually take some time to reflect on my journey of the last couple of months. So thanks for that. In terms of how people can get in touch, we have our website, aevahealth.com. We are launching 1st of Jan. So stay tuned. We have a wait list that's open. So please sign up to that. It's all on our website. We have an Instagram account, which is aeva.health. And I'm on LinkedIn at Aoife Spillane. For those of you that have never encountered the Irish name, you probably see it in the podcast, but it's part of those wild Irish names. And yeah, reach out, and yeah, be great to get connected.
Great. Thank you very much. It'll all be in the show notes.
Thanks.